Hello and welcome to our channel, Learn English Now, where we teach English through powerful and emotional stories. Today we begin the incredible journey of George Washington, a man who changed the world. He was not born rich or powerful. He was not a king or a general at birth. He was just a quiet boy from Virginia. But he became a leader, a hero, and the first president of the United States. This story is 100% real. It is full of danger, courage, and decisions that shaped history. We will explain it in simple English so you can enjoy the story and improve your English at the same time. So relax and listen carefully. And if you love learning English through stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this. Now let's begin. The Early Life 1. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Virginia, one of the 13 British colonies in North America. At that time, the United States did not exist. Everything was under the control of the British king. People followed British laws, they paid British taxes, and they had no vote, no freedom to choose their leaders. George's family lived on a tobacco farm. His father's name was Augustine Washington. He was a farmer and businessman. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was strict and strong. She taught George how to work hard and follow rules. George had 9 brothers and sisters. Life was not easy. There was no electricity, no cars, no schools like today. They grew their own food and made most of what they needed. When George was only 11 years old, his father died. This was a very hard moment for him. He lost his guide, his protector, and his chance for a big education. Some boys from rich families went to school in England. George could not. His dreams seemed small now. But George did not give up. He read books, he listened, he worked hard, he studied math, farming, and how to be a gentleman. Even at a young age, he showed signs of leadership. He was calm, tall, and serious. People respected him, even as a boy. The first job, too. At the age of 16, George got his first job. He became a land surveyor. A surveyor measures land and makes maps. It sounds simple, but it was a very dangerous job. George traveled through forests and mountains. He crossed rivers and faced wild animals. He slept on the ground. He lived with little food, but he never complained. This job made him strong. It also gave him something powerful knowledge of the land. He saw the rivers, the valleys, and the mountains of Virginia. He met many people. He learned how people lived. He learned about borders and land ownership. And more importantly, people began to trust him. They saw a young man who was quiet but reliable. A man who finished what he started. A man who could lead. In 1753, something important happened. The British and the French were fighting over land in North America. The British governor needed someone to deliver a message to the French army. It was a dangerous mission. Many men said no. But George said yes. He was only 21 years old. He traveled for hundreds of miles through snow and cold. He almost died several times. Once, Native Americans tried to kill him. Another time, he fell into a frozen river. But George survived. He finished the mission, and he returned with important news. People were amazed. A young man, just 21, had done something few could do. George became famous in Virginia. Soon, he joined the British colonial army. He became a major, then a colonel. He led men into battle during the French and Indian War. In one famous fight, bullets passed through his coat. 2 horses were shot under him, but George was not hurt. Many soldiers believed he was protected by God. But not everything was good. George learned a painful lesson. The British generals did not respect him. He was born in the colonies, not in England. They paid him less. They gave him less power. They treated him like he was second class. This hurt George. He had risked his life. He had done everything right, but he was still not treated fairly. And deep inside, he began to wonder what if the colonies could be free. Life at Mount Vernon 4. After the war, George left the army. He returned to his home, a large farm called Mount Vernon. He became a farmer, a businessman, and a landowner. In 1759, George married Martha Custis, a rich widow with 2 children. George and Martha never had children together, but George raised Martha's children as his own. Life at Mount Vernon was busy. George managed the land, the workers, and the business. He became one of the most respected men in Virginia. But this part of his life also had something dark. George, like many rich men of that time, owned slaves. He believed it was normal, but later in life, his thoughts began to change. In his will, he said his slaves should be freed after his death. He was the only founding father to do that. Still, this part of his story is painful and important to remember. The Call for Freedom 5. During the 1760s, everything started to change. The British government passed new laws. They taxed American tea, paper, and other goods. The people in the colonies were angry. They had no vote. They had no voice. They called it taxation without representation. George Washington was not a loud protester. He didn't shout in the streets, but he believed in justice. He believed in fairness, and he began to join meetings with other leaders. They talked about freedom, about independence. In 1774, George was chosen to represent Virginia at the First Continental Congress. This was a meeting of leaders from all 13 colonies. They wanted to find a peaceful solution with Britain. But deep inside, many of them, including George, were ready to fight. The beginning of war. 6. In April 1775, everything changed. British soldiers and American colonists clashed in the towns of Lexington and Concord. These were the first battles of the American Revolutionary War. The colonies were no longer just talking about freedom. Now they were fighting for it. But the colonies had a problem. They didn't have an army. They had farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers, brave people, but not trained soldiers. They needed a leader, someone strong, someone calm, someone everyone trusted. They chose George Washington. In June 1775, the Continental Congress made George Washington the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He did not ask for the job. He did not want power, but he accepted the duty. He knew the risk. If the colonies lost the war, he could be arrested or even hanged for treason. But George believed in the cause. He believed that freedom was worth fighting for. A hard task. 7. George's army was not like the British Army. The British had trained soldiers, uniforms, weapons, and money. George had volunteers. They had few guns, almost no food, and no experience. Washington faced a difficult challenge. Many of his men had never been in a real battle. Some had never even fired a gun. There was no money to pay them. Many had no shoes. Some didn't have proper clothes for winter. But George didn't give up. He trained his soldiers. He encouraged them. He stood beside them. He gave them hope. He led with example, not with words. One of his first big victories came in March 1776, when he forced the British to leave Boston. It gave the colonies their first major success. People began to believe maybe they could win. The Declaration of Independence. While George was leading the army, something historic happened. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. The colonies officially broke ties with Britain. They were no longer British subjects. They were Americans. This was a bold and dangerous move. Now there was no going back. The colonies had declared war on the most powerful empire in the world, and George Washington was leading that fight. But the war was not going well. After the victory in Boston, things got harder. In New York, the American army lost battle after battle. The British pushed them back. Many soldiers ran away. The army almost collapsed. People began to lose hope. Some even said George Washington should be replaced. But George didn't quit. The Surprise Attack 9. It was now December 1776. The American army was cold, hungry, and tired. They had lost many battles. Many soldiers had left. Some leaders thought the revolution was finished. But George had a plan. On the night of December 25th, while the British and their allies were celebrating Christmas, George led his troops across the icy Delaware River. It was dark, freezing, and dangerous, but George did not hesitate. Early in the morning, they attacked the enemy camp in Trenton, New Jersey. It was a surprise. The enemy was not ready. The Americans won. This victory was small, but powerful. It lifted the spirit of the army. It gave the people hope again. George had done the impossible. He had turned defeat into strength. A week later, he won again in Princeton. For the first time, people started to believe the Americans could win. A winter of pain 10. But the war was far from over. In 1777, the British captured Philadelphia, the capital of the colonies. George's army was forced to retreat. They went to a place called Valley Forge to spend the winter. That winter was one of the hardest times in George Washington's life. The soldiers had little food. Many had no shoes. They lived in wooden huts with cold winds blowing through the cracks. Disease spread quickly. Over 2,000 soldiers died. But George stayed with them. He did not leave. He walked through the snow. He spoke with his men. He shared their pain. His leadership kept them going. At Valley Forge, the army began to change. A man named Baron von Steuben, a German officer, came to help. He trained the soldiers and turned them into a real army. By spring, the American army was stronger, better, and ready to fight again. A long, difficult war. 11. The war continued for many years. There were victories and defeats. There was fear, but also hope. George Washington never gave up. He lost many battles. His army almost ran out of money, but he kept going. He wrote letters. He begged Congress for supplies. He held the army together with patience and determination. Many people wanted him to become king, but George said no. He didn't fight a king just to become another one. He was fighting for something bigger, a free country with free people. In 1781, with help from the French, George Washington surrounded the British Army at Yorktown, Virginia. After weeks of fighting, the British Commander General Cornwallis surrendered. The war was over, After 8 long years, the colonies had won. America was free. George Washington had led a revolution. He had done something no one thought was possible. He did not ask for money. He did not take power. When the war ended, he resigned as commander of the army and returned to his farm at Mount Vernon. He wanted to go back to a quiet life. But history was not finished with him yet. A new country is born. The war was over, but the work was not finished. The American colonies were now free, but they were also divided and weak. Each state had its own laws, money, and army. There was no strong central government. The country was falling apart before it even began. Many people were scared. What would happen next? Could this new country survive? Could the states unite? The people turned once again to the only man they trusted, George Washington. He didn't want power. He wanted to stay on his farm. But the country needed him. So, he returned to help build something new, a real, strong, and united United States of America. In 1787, George was asked to lead the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. He helped write the U.S. Constitution, the document that would become the foundation of American law and government. People across the country wanted him to be the first leader of this new nation. In 1789, George Washington was elected the first president of the United States. He received every single vote, the only president in history to do so. The first president 14. George Washington had won the war. Now he had to lead a country. There were no examples, no rules, no past presidents to follow. He had to create everything from scratch. He chose people from different states and ideas to help him. He created the first cabinet, the group of advisors that would help the president make decisions. He chose Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. Washington worked hard to stay neutral and fair. He listened to every side. He didn't want to act like a king. He refused to be called Your Majesty. People called him Mr. President, a simple but respectful title. He believed the president should serve the people, not rule them. During his presidency, many difficult problems appeared. There were arguments between states. There were fights about money and power. Some people wanted war with other countries. Others wanted peace. Washington stayed calm. He used his wisdom to keep the country together. He helped build the capital city that would later be named after him, Washington, D.C. He served for 2 terms, 8 years in total. People begged him to stay longer, but he said no. He believed that power should pass peacefully to others. He had started a new tradition, one that would protect American democracy forever. Saying goodbye 15. In 1797, after 8 years as president, George Washington finally said goodbye to public life. In his farewell address, he warned the country about 2 things. First, he warned against political parties because they could divide the country. Second, he warned against foreign alliances because they could lead the U.S. into wars it didn't need. His words were wise, and even today, many people still read his speech. After retiring, George returned to Mount Vernon. He was finally free to enjoy the peace he had fought so hard for. He spent time with Martha, took care of his land, and welcomed visitors from all over the world. But his rest did not last long. The final days, 16. In December 1799, George Washington went out to ride his horse, even though the weather was cold and rainy. That evening, he started to feel sick. His throat hurt. He had trouble breathing. The next day, he got worse. Doctors came to help, but their treatments did more harm than good. They tried bleeding him, a common practice at the time, and took out too much blood. On December 14th, 1799, at the age of 67, George Washington died peacefully in his home. His last words were simple and calm. He said, "I am not afraid to go." The news of his death spread quickly. People cried in the streets. Churches rang their bells. The whole country went into mourning. Even leaders in Europe, including in France and England, paid respect to the man who had once been their enemy. A legacy that lives on 17. George Washington was more than a general, more than a president. He was a symbol. He gave up power not once, but twice. First after the war, and again after the presidency. He could have been king, but he chose to be a citizen, a servant of the people. He helped create a country where the law is above any one man, where leaders are chosen by the people, where freedom is not just a dream, but a right. Today, his face is on the U.S. $1 bill and the quarter coin. The capital city of the United States is named after him. Schools, streets, and parks carry his name. But his real legacy is not in stone or money. It is in the idea that a single person with courage, honor, and sacrifice can change the world.